Hello again. Now let's take you back live once more to Parliament, just the precinct there, business editor Devin Murugan there with more reaction this afternoon to the midterm budget speech. Devin, good afternoon and over to you.
Yes, thanks very much indeed, Brad. And I mean, look, it's a less populated scene here in Parliament for this budget, and you would expect that because of COVID-19 and everything related to that. So the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, putting forward his maiden budget today. I want to get some reaction now from the official opposition, the DA Shadow Minister of Finance, Deon George. It looked at the face of it, Deon, that this was a prudent budget. You still say that a lot more could have been said in this paper. Why is that?
We did set out our expectations before the budget, and they were disappointed. I think specifically we were looking for something in terms of economic growth. We need to accelerate our economic growth, and the biggest impediment to that is our energy crisis, the fact that our lights are going off all the time. Although the Minister did speak about generation, he certainly never went far enough and certainly isn't seeing it as a crisis. So we do think that there should have been a lot more urgency on that. Also, we want to see some incentives for business to boom. For example, we want to have a look at small, medium and micro enterprises. What is going to be happening for them? So we're hopeful that in February we'll see something, because we certainly didn't see it now. If we also look at the public sector wage bill, the Minister's talking about tough love on the state-owned enterprises, and we support the view that you're not going to put more money on them. But that's where he needs to exercise the tough love, is to actually focus on the public sector wage bill. That is what's driving our debt crisis. And what debt is now doing, it's crowding out. It's crowding out health. It's crowding out basic services on the front line. Also what it's doing, it's crowding out money to the provinces. So what we're going to see is there's going to be an impact on the provinces. The provincial allocations are going to reduce, and that's going to mean less service delivery. So we don't think that it was a prudent budget. We actually don't think the Minister went anywhere near far enough to address the problems that we have. We do support the idea that additional money in the fisc is going to be used to reduce debt and also to support vulnerable people. We support that. What we will not support is any tax increases. We'll have to see that in February, because that's usually when that is done.
I can just come in there for a second, because the Finance Minister spoke to me just minutes ago, and he reflects that sentiment, Deon, that, look, the last thing he wants is to actually make it more difficult for South Africans through these tax increases, but we're going to have to get revenue at some point. And as opposed towards the end of the speech, he spoke about structural reform. That is exactly what would get businesses investing in this country. Are you happy with the pace of structural reform? Because the intention's there.
Well, if the intention is there, we want to see the action. I mean, government has been speaking for a very long time about structural reform. There's been no structural reform that actually makes any impact. For example, if you look at the labour regime in South Africa, there is no political will to tackle that at all. And that means that business cannot thrive. So we can talk as much as we like about cutting back and doing all sorts of things, but the fact of the matter is, if the economy doesn't grow, you don't get extra revenue and you don't have money then to spend. If you spend money inappropriately, you also find that your economy starts to suffer on the macroeconomic level. So government is not prudently managing our economy, and that's the problem that we have.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Deon George, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I want to bring in very quickly the chief economist at Old Mutual, Johan Els. Johan, you watched this budget. Thanks indeed for talking to us. I mean, at the face of it, it does sound like the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, is continuing on the same path as his predecessor, Tito Mboweni. Are you happy with what you saw in terms of fiscal consolidation today?
Absolutely. The message was very strong indeed. Maybe even stronger than what we expected after the July unrest and the local government elections. Some people might have expected a jump to the left, more spending. And yes, that's a risk down the line, but in terms of the message, fantastic. I absolutely agree with the Minister that the only permanent solution is higher, more sustained economic growth. And he mentioned, as you rightly said as well, more policy reform is urgently needed and is on its way.
We've still got this terrifying figure of paying 21 cents on every rand we borrow for rent. And what that basically does, we've heard this before, is that it robs money from building hospitals, it robs money from education, it even robs money from what they intended to do with the grant. We've got to bring that debt down. Are you convinced that we're on the right trajectory?
Well, given the fiscal consolidation plans, cutting back the budget deficit through cutting expenditure, but also the higher economic growth, you need that higher growth to sustainably get that debt lower. Because, as you say, that's crowding out private sector investment, that's crowding out other spending. the VAT rate could be zero, for instance, if we didn't have to pay interest on the debt.
Look, I mean, we've touched on this on the first question, that at some point in time, this gift that we have with the mining tax receipts boosting our tax coffers will come to an end. Dondo Godongwana, or rather Dondo Mohajane, the DG, telling me that the average is going to get back to 1.7. Now, we need a growth rate of at least 5% to ensure unemployment goes down, all right? We're going to come back to that 1 to 2% bracket. If we don't get in the revenue, you can forget any other spending expedition here. How do we get back on track? Is it all about business confidence?
It is mainly about business confidence. So we're not quickly going to get to 4-5%, but we can easily get towards 2-2.5%, which is already more than double the 1% we had in the 5 years to 2019. So that's starting to help, and it's becoming more sustained, and that's important. But to get towards 4-5%, we need serious, full-scale privatization. We need full-scale deregulation of the labour market. Those are perhaps bridges too far for this government, but we're moving in the direction, at least under this minister, under this president, of significantly more private sector involvement in the economy and in state-owned enterprises. So at least we've turned the tide of negative news, the downward trajectory. We've turned that around. We're busy moving upwards.
Yeah. Just a final question to you. Do you think more could be said about what South Africans are most frustrated about at the moment? Lights are off, TV sets are off, a lot of the students can't study for the exams, and I'm talking about power cuts here. Could it have featured with more prominence in this budget?
There's not a lot they can do overnight, tomorrow, the next month or next year. Some of that is in the pipeline. I tell people that the tide has turned already in terms of the maintenance program, and there's massive energy investment coming in South Africa. That could perhaps be the growth driver in South Africa. In terms of load shedding at the moment, there's no short-term solution. But what is in the pipeline means that by this time next year, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, load shedding will be significantly less risky.
Mr. Els, Jon Els from Old Mutual, Chief Economist there. Thanks very much indeed for those insights. And yeah, so you've got some diversified opinion coming here depending on who you talk to. But overall, as I said time and time again, Braden, it seems as though the new finance minister is following that path that his predecessor had followed, tightening the ship. And I speak of Tito Mboweni here.
Yeah.